Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Red Dead Redemption: History, Myth, and Violence in the Video Game West. Edited by John Wills and Esther Wright. Narrated by Andrew Joseph Perez. Introduction. Albert Mason. This is America, after all. We hold a love for killers that borders on the macabre. Loving killers is part of our makeup. Arthur Morgan. Maybe. But usually, we wait until after they're dead. It starts with a young boy in a Stetson, making finger guns at the horizon and pew-pew noises with his mouth. His father returns home, greets his wife and son, assures them that their troubles are finally over. They've struck gold. He gives his son a pistol and sends him down to the river to shoot at his mother's pots and pans for practice. Soon, he's shooting at actual bandits invading the homestead, coming for his family. And not long after, we see the boy grow into a fearsome and resilient bounty hunter in pursuit of the man who killed his parents on that day. Crudely animated by today's standards and deceptively basic in its premise, you'd be forgiven for doubting at the time that this was to be the backstory for one of the most successful and critically acclaimed video game franchises ever. But, in many ways, it's the perfect start to a Western adventure. The expansion of Rockstar's West from 2004's Red Dead Revolver to 2018's Red Dead Redemption 2 is, by and large, a tale of increasing ambition to capture a moment in time. A persistent fascination with perhaps the most enduring, iconic phase of American history in the popular imagination. Hundreds, likely thousands, of works have been written about the 19th century conquest of the American West, the region's relationship to and foundation in our national popular culture, and the manufactured memories we now associate with it, which obscure any lived historical reality that might once have existed. Thousands of pulp novels and Hollywood movies have depicted the Wild West frontier on page and screen. Yet, in established critical analysis of Western history, image, and myth, the Western video game remains an afterthought, a quirky add-on, supplemental to the more proper, serious consideration of gaming's more legitimate media ancestors. It cannot, nor should not, remain this way. The Red Dead franchise represents perhaps the most important intervention into the Western genre of the 21st century. Deeply inspired by canonical genre staples, the franchise has itself gone on to inspire new and impressive Western reboots like HBO's Westworld, 2016 onward, becoming a truly legitimate reference point and cultural anchor. This book is not a complete nor final reckoning with the power and meaning of Red Dead. No book could ever claim such a feat, but it is a start. And in this introduction, we seek to map out some of Red Dead's broader context and content. The Red Dead franchise. How to express in words what the Red Dead franchise is and does. While in their individual chapters throughout this book, our contributors explore various aspects of the franchise's narrative and gameplay in greater depth, it serves us here to briefly sketch out the contours of Rockstar's Western imagination as it has been explored through 3 titles so far. In Red Dead Revolver, we follow Red Harlow, son of gold miner Nate Harlow and his Native American wife Falling Star, as he develops from a young boy playing cowboy to a bounty hunter in search of vengeance. A linear, arcade-style game originally funded by Japanese developer Capcom and comprising levels and bosses of increasing difficulty, Revolver takes the player on a tour of archetypal Western locales, canyons, frontier outposts, homesteads, and plains. A patchwork of Italian Western music accompanies the gameplay. Hardly a sophisticated narrative, and full of humor that now appears as crude and dated as the graphics and gameplay, Revolver nonetheless offers an undeniably classically Western story of justice and revenge set in the 1880s. As a mostly silent half-native warrior, Red isn't the only version of a Western trope the player meets, and gets to occupy the role of along the way. The English gentleman sharpshooter, Jack Swift, a corrupt Mexican general, Javier Diego, a native warrior and Red's cousin, Shadow Wolf, a hardy female rancher, Annie Stokes, and a formerly enslaved Union soldier, Buffalo Soldier, all make an appearance in Rockstar's first Western. In many ways, it's a strikingly more diverse cast of characters than the visions of the West that Rockstar would produce later. Published in 2010 and set in 1911, Rockstar's second Western, Red Dead Redemption, RDR, begins with Scottish-American rancher and gunfighter John Marston stepping off a train in Blackwater. Once a frontier town, now with cobbled streets and gas lanterns, the world is changing, modernizing around him. He is already a relic of the past, a former outlaw brought back for one last job to protect his family, stepping into an uncomfortable future. RDR, as the first game in the franchise conceived and brought to life solely by Rockstar and for then next-generation gaming consoles, is naturally a more expansive and developed reckoning with the nature of the American West than Revolver. Offering an open game world, RDR afforded the player unrivaled opportunities at the time to explore the frontier, to encounter strangers made strange by its harsh landscapes, assist passers-by, ward off animal attacks, duel with villains, gamble and get drunk at saloons, and even collect prairie herbs. In gameplay terms, the title features a distinctive Deadeye gunslinger mechanic that allows players to slow down the action, an established feature of other Rockstar titles like Revolver, Max Payne 2001 to 2012, and Grand Theft Auto V 2013. It features its own honor system, reflecting player morality and fame for their deeds or misdeeds. The story relates Marston's untiring quest to save his kidnapped family held by Bureau of Investigation agents Edgar Ross and Archer Fordham. Marston becomes embroiled in all manner of skirmishes, rebellions, and bounty hunting, including taking on the remaining fragments of his old gang, led by Dutch Vanderland. From an Ennio Morricone-inspired original score to a plot that borrows heavily from Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, 1969, cinematic and wider pop-cultural influences abound. Red Dead Redemption 2, RDR2, in many ways represents the apex of a contemporary wave of mainstream historical video games. The third Rockstar Western features an even more massive and detailed open world, evidently meticulously researched and lovingly rendered. Hundreds of species of animals and types of flora populate a range of unique environments and landscapes. With side missions and online quests, the title offers hundreds of hours of gameplay. In place of Marston, it casts outlaw Arthur Morgan as playable protagonist, while still fleshing out the backstory of Rockstar's former leading man. Servicing Red Dead fans well with deeper insight into the exploits and downfall of the Vanderland gang and the increasing volatility of its patriarch, the game builds on prior stories. In that sense, Rockstar's most developed Western world and narrative, an emotive and somber lament for the Old West, is still a game anchored to and in service of the story that its franchise predecessors established, for better or indeed for worse. The history on show in RDR2 is on many levels breathtaking. The game hat-tips the advent of the motor car and electricity, the shadow of the Civil War and slavery, the suffragette movement, the rise of American industrialism and capitalism, and the power of Pinkerton detectives in their service. It lavishly indulges both rural and urban architecture of the historic West, recreated painstakingly in composite, allegorical digital form. But the cornerstone of the Red Dead franchise has always been a masculine experience of the American West, and a white masculine experience at that. The violent, tragic, poetic deaths of John Marston and Arthur Morgan as depicted by Rockstar, and their embedded claims that a man cannot outrun his foul deeds no matter how steadfastly he seeks redemption, mark these stories with the indelible notion that such white men are the ultimate victim of American progress and civilization, and those who elicit such sympathies. Some of Rockstar's staunchest criticism has been directed at the company's stubborn refusal to turn its gaze toward anything else at best, and at worst, to actively indulge in racist and sexist stereotypes and the Western's deeply conservative and colonialist ideological baggage, as later chapters in this book explore. The other cornerstones of the thematic engagement we find in the Red Dead franchise can be understood by looking deeper into the background at Rockstar itself and the developer's branding. Red Dead as a Rockstar product. For over 2 decades, Rockstar has resolved to prove the cultural status of video games and their relative worth compared to more established and more respected media like film and television. To do so, they have by and large drawn inspiration from and sought to remediate pervasive American cultural genres. That is, Rockstar's output as a studio almost exclusively consists of games which depict or reference iconic moments or specific examples of American cinema. We can also read the company's development history as a series of titles through which they have provided players with a distinctively Rockstar perspective on America, past and present. This is not to merely resurrect well-worn and problematized mid-20th century discussions about the auteur, authorship, and intentionality. Game developers employ hundreds or thousands of individuals, each with their particular job roles and responsibilities. But ideas about authorship, vision, and genius have taken on a new power and value in the 21st century, having been weaponized by creatives and companies across the media industries and reconstituted into marketing discourses designed to persuade potential consumers of their worth. Rockstar is deeply embedded in such a trend. Marketing discourses for their games dedicate significant time and energy to claiming their authenticity, placing them in highly specific historical and cultural contexts while assuring players that their games are the product of such a Rockstar vision. The essays in this book at various points dissect not only the possible meanings and contradictions of Rockstar's vision of the West, but the machinations of the company behind it. Rockstar's games can also be defined both by an adoration for and a critique of American culture and society, a tension point that has caused debate among those who think and write critically about their output and the meaning of their games. Where is the line between loving homage and critical parody, and merely hollow pastiche? Is it actually possible to meaningfully criticize what we love, to criticize cultural genres and structures so embedded in our everyday lives we almost no longer perceive them? Can we truly accept Rockstar's games as critical interrogations of American society, culture, and history when they otherwise seem to rely so heavily on conservative stereotypes and outmoded historical assessments? Many chapters in this book attempt to address these questions explicitly or more implicitly. In hindsight then, and with a keen eye fixed on the development of Rockstar's brand identity, the fact that the company has been dedicated to a video game Western franchise for over 15 years is not a particularly surprising creative or economic decision, especially given the place of the Western and ideas about the frontier in traditional American society and history, and the continued endurance of those symbols and myths. As a leading video game brand, Rockstar continues to appropriate, exploit, and even amend an older product that once sold in droves, a brand of history popularly referred to as the Wild West. Western history and games. Like a modern video game with different routes and difficulty settings, Western history is itself marked by competing pathways and intellectual challenges. The traditional history of the West, the most familiar and accessible of pathways, tells of pioneers moving west in direct and linear fashion, with their trailblazing endeavors emblematic of a greater American journey and victory. The hubris of economic expansion, manifest destiny, religious salvation, and civilizing, both the Native American and the wilderness, invited Easterners to take to the trails. It is a history that speaks to a nation's grand mission, and still has potent currency. As President Barack Obama reflected while speaking of the 1862 Homestead Act, there are certain things only a union can do, as he paid homage to the courage of our pioneers to settle the American West. Such a history of the West owes much to early Western scholarship. Frederick Jackson Turner delivered his frontier thesis before the American Historical Association back in 1893. Although less than popularly received at the time, it became the standard-bearer for academic scholarship and, on some levels, the easiest way to navigate the region and its meanings. Turner connected the frontier, which he saw as closed in 1890 when the U.S. Census recorded the territory settled, with the making of Americans themselves. Caught in a position of savagery versus civilization, these new Americans emerged as a unique group of people. While Turner deified the farmer as the quintessential pioneer, others chose the cowboy as popular champion, not least William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody, who held his Wild West show just outside the World's Columbian Exposition the same time Turner delivered his thesis there, as it is customary to point out in historiographical works on the scholarly and popular origins of the West. A more challenging route through history began its first steps not long after and emerged with great coherence in the 1980s and 1990s. In part, a reaction to social movements of the 1960s and 1970s, new Western historians, such as Patricia Nelson Limerick and Richard White, sought to rewrite the history of the West around core themes of conflict, sacrifice, and loss. Rejecting traditional historical paradigms, the movement cast the frontier as irrelevant at best, White excising the term from his work, an F-word expletive at worst. Indigenous, multi-ethnic, place-based, and ecological perspectives became newly important, and the trail became one of tears more than triumph. In recent years, scholars have departed from both new and old perspectives, instead emphasizing the middle ground of native European interaction, the forces of settler colonialism, and the significance of the West's global ties. The historic West relays different messages to different people. For some, the Wild West, rich in the mythos of individualism and living off the land, services a collective nostalgia for altogether simpler times. A return to the cowboy's code is offered as a truer American way of living. For others, the frontier experience is a lesson in destructive behavior. The past environmental horrors of westerly pioneering, the damage of hydraulic water jets during the gold rush, the wild rivers at standstill, congested with cut logs, and the suffocating storms of the Dust Bowl, presage and partner contemporary climate crises. People learn about the competing histories of the West from a multiplicity of sources. Not just the preserve of academic scholars, Western history is something lived through and discovered by hand. It is located in the dusty photograph albums of family-owned farms, the barely legible guest books of vacationers at Yosemite's Ahwahnee Hotel, the architectural ruin of ghost towns, the craftwork of Indian reservations, and the hot brand of cattle on the land. The history of the West has been relayed with various degrees of accuracy across every kind of entertainment media. From Buffalo Bill's Wild West show to Ken Burns' 1996 television documentary miniseries, simply titled The West, through to today's podcasts and popular fictions, Western history is experienced by all. In the last few decades, that delivery of historic content has included the new media of video games. As today's most financially successful entertainment format, Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto V significantly outperforming Star Wars, for example, the cultural reach of video games is not to be underestimated. Historical video game series such as Medal of Honor, 1999 forward, Call of Duty, 2003 forward, and Assassin's Creed, 2007 forward, have undoubtedly shaped understandings and perceptions of the past. Alongside World War II, the Wild West as a historical theme has inspired a range of games dating back to the 1970s. Designed for the classroom by trainee teachers, the Oregon Trail, 1971, was arguably the first Western computer game, and, notably, aimed to educate kids about frontier history. The text-based management title, creator Don Rawich called it a simulation model, sought to capture the hardship of pioneering, imparting a playful sense of realism, with travelers hit by bad illness and hostile riders on their journey west. Other early game designers employed the historical West as a colorful canvas for action scenarios, a familiar backdrop in which to place a shooting game or a scrolling beat-em-up. The gamifying of Western history included blatant divergences from the lived experience that deservedly courted controversy and protest. In 1982, Mystique released the adult-oriented soft porn title Custer's Revenge for the Atari 2600 console that depicted Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer raping Native women in retaliation for defeat at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Women Against Pornography and the American Indian Movement protested the title. With heavy stereotyping of Native Americans, Activision's Gun, 2005, ignited similar boycotts. As the most successful Western video game series then, Rockstar's Red Dead promotes Western history to the widest audience yet. With over 60 million units in sale, Red Dead easily exceeds the ticket revenue of the biggest Hollywood Westerns, and highlights the broader reach of the video game Western. For many players, and indeed many students, Red Dead provides their most extensive foray into Western history. Hardcore online players and story completionists expend in excess of 100 hours residing in Rockstar country, immersed in a simulation of Western history far more complex than that offered by a single book or film. On the surface, this is an exemplary historical game, a blueprint for representing historical research and arguments through the medium of games. The Red Dead series has also been universally popularly applauded. With a Metacritic average score of 97 out of 100, RDR2 stands as one of the most acclaimed video games of our era. In her review for The Guardian newspaper, Keza McDonald declared RDR2 a landmark game and a near miracle, while Peter Suderman, writing for The New York Times, called it the most ambitious game ever made, true art, and a new American epic for the digital age. Considering its developer's reputation for courting controversy, it is perhaps surprising that the series has been so well received. In part, this owes to the perceived authenticity of the product, but also to Rockstar's West being a place of surprising middleness in terms of historical depiction. Intriguingly, within its twisting story arcs and vibrant range of characters, Red Dead imparts traditional and revised histories of the West. It panders to an idolization of the violent gunslinger, but also hints at the tragedy and complexity of the frontier. The exactitude of Rockstar's historic West is one of the recurring themes of this volume. Storytelling, interaction, and play. The portrayal of history in Red Dead equally reflects a distinctively Western storytelling tradition. Perhaps more than any other period or place, the American West has inspired the richest of folklore. The first stories of the West date back thousands of years in the guise of indigenous oral traditions. As Europeans colonized Western territories, aggrandized stories of faunal abundance and legendary hunts surfaced, followed soon by tales of mineral bonanzas and boomtowns. In the latter half of the 19th century, Beadle and Adams' dime novels packaged the West into a standardized story for the working classes, a neatly wrapped script of high adventure designed to titillate and sell alongside other speedily written stories about detectives, romantics, and pirates. Early 20th century novelists, such as Zane Grey, enriched the definition of the West as a fictive adventure with bestsellers such as Riders of the Purple Sage, 1912. Readers lapped up this imaginative and romantic frontier West made up of history, story, and nostalgia. The physical, tactile sense of turning pages kept the wagon trains going and the Indians at bay. Literature helped mold the frontier myth. In 1903, Edwin S. Porter produced The Great Train Robbery, the first filmic Western. At just 12 minutes, Porter compressed the story of the West into a series of short, self-contained segments. The film told the story of outlaws robbing a steam locomotive, an image so enduring it continues to find its way into Western fictions, Rockstar's included. The Western successfully morphed into a highly visual entertainment format, emerging as one of the founding genres of Hollywood. The Hollywood Western appealed because it told the tale of America. It also appealed because it brimmed with action, romance, rugged individualism, and villainy. The Western genre dominated mass entertainment from the 1930s through to the 1960s. At the movie theater, John Ford's Stagecoach, 1939, and George Stevens's Shane, 1953, showed a richness of archetypes and landscapes. Famous cowboy actors included the singing cowboy Gene Autry, conservative icon John Wayne, and Clint Eastwood, the man with no name who would come to define the so-called revisionist wave of post-1960s westerns for many. Meanwhile, Ronald Reagan took his cowboy actor persona all the way to the presidency. Doris Day entertained in song in Calamity Jane, 1953, while Sidney Poitier epitomized frontier panache in Duel at Diablo, 1966. The sheer volume of celluloid titles across the years defied any single interpretation or message, though many have tried to offer such. While certain storylines, cavalry fighting Indians, the redeemed gunslinger, heroic figures, not least Wayne's white conservative, and historic myths dominated, the filmic Western exhibited a richness still worthy of exploration. In the 1950s and 1960s, televisual westerns such as The Lone Ranger, 1949-57, Rawhide, 1959-65, Bonanza, 1959-73, and Gunsmoke, 1955-75, often based on radio shows, brought cinematic-style frontier storylines directly into the home. The Western story served as welcome addition to a suburban family's TV dinner, providing an escape to simpler, less technological times. In the tumult of a depressed nation caught up in the Vietnam War, Watergate, and social strife, the cinematic Western nonetheless seemed precariously out of touch by the 1970s. Sergio Leone's Italian genre deconstructions, and now canonical revisions of Western violence by Sam Peckinpah in films such as The Wild Bunch, 1969, eventually gave way to Westerns in space, such as Star Wars, 1977, and the traditional cinematic frontier largely disappeared from screen, at least for a decade. With new entertainment capabilities, the video game revisited past storyboards with gusto. In the 1970s, the first video game westerns innovated in technology but largely replicated the look and feel of Hollywood westerns. An adaptation of Konami's Western Gun, highlighting the West as an international story, Chicago's Midway placed one of the first action westerns, Gunfight, 1975, into the arcades. The game depicted two stick-like cowboys on screen, facing off against each other in a classic frontier duel. The limits of the computer hardware meant that both cowboys remained human-controlled, and a few pixelated cacti represented the whole of the trans-Mississippi landscape. Gunfight lacked any quantifiable backstory. It, nonetheless, proved a commercial success. In the 1980s, black and white graphics turned color. Pixels scrolled left and right, and the digital West became far more animated. However, the storytelling remained rudimentary, basic in tone and programming, and fundamentally task-driven, extending only to gunfighters rescuing damsels or seeking revenge, or the occasional honing of gun or horse skills, as in SNK's Lasso, 1982. Players were still left to imagine their own backstories. In 1991, Robert Grebe launched American Laser Games with the arcade title Mad Dog McCree. Shot at Eve's Movie Ranch, New Mexico, and deploying the latest Laserdisc technology, the arcade machine featured live-action scenes straight out of the movies. Real actors spoke directly to the camera and player. The old saloon doors of film set buildings swayed, live horses brayed, and the player used a light gun to shoot at myriad actor villains, the hardware registering light changes. Like choreographed sections of the Great Train Robbery, players navigated successive stages of action, facing off Mad Dog himself in a duel at the end. Where once vaudeville audiences ducked in their seats when outlaw Justice D. Barnes from Porter's Picture fired at them, now video game players watched Mad Dog go for his guns, then briskly shot back. Mad Dog McCree played like an interactive movie, and the Western video game seemed increasingly caught in its celluloid heritage. Beginning with Spellbound's Desperados, 2001, and later Red Dead Revolver, Western video games in the 21st century shifted again, expanding on the storytelling capabilities of the medium, offering more diverse perspectives, while again building on a long tradition of frontier storytelling. Filmic influences continued unabated, particularly in
Sample complete. Ready to continue?